Hey, welcome back to my Fundamentals of Photography series. Today we're looking at shutter speed. Now this is just a very basic look at what shutter speed is, what it does and where to find it on your camera. Shutter speed is one of the fundamental parts of exposure. You've got aperture that we did in the last video, you've got ISO which we're going to do in the next video, but this one is all about the length of time the shutter is open to let light into the camera. So a shutter is just a light-proof curtain which allows light into the back of the camera and onto the digital chip. The amount of time that stays open is called the shutter speed. Some camera manufacturers, like Canon for example, use time value, but it's just exactly the same thing. So shutter speed and time value are just different words for exactly the same thing. So on a DSLR camera or a compact camera or a bridge camera or a 4/3 camera, you will find that there will be a setting for shutter speed that will allow you to control the amount of light that enters into the camera, thus allowing you to control the actual exposure. All camera makes have the same shutter speeds because it's all worked out around the mathematics concerning one aperture stop of light. So all the numbers, be it on a Canon camera, a Nikon camera, a Sony camera, an Olympus camera, a Pentax camera, are all going to be the same values. So let's just have a quick dive in. On the higher end DSLR Nikon cameras, they have an LCD screen on the top here, which is where I'm going to show you. Some will also show you on the back LCD, some will show you in the viewfinder. So it doesn't matter where on your camera the information is displayed, it will always read the same sorts of things. Let's just have a look on the LCD on my camera. As you'll see, you've got several different numbers here. We've got the M value there. That's just to note that I'm in manual mode, so I can just alter one of the parameters. And then we've got two numbers here. We've got 160 and we've got F9. F9 just relates to the aperture, which we did in the last video, and I'll put a link up in the top there just so you can see that. But this one we're referring to here is the 160. Now the 160 is just a speed that was last set on this camera. So we'll start on 100 and then you can go up to 125. Now you might expect the next one to jump to 150, but it doesn't, it's 160. And you might expect the next one to be, I don't know, 225 or something like that. It's 200. So they don't actually seem to correlate to anything because they're all concerned with mathematics involved in one aperture stop of light. So you don't need to know those mathematics, the camera works it all out for you, but you'll just need to know that it doesn't matter which camera you have, be it a Nikon, Canon, Pentax, Olympus, Sony, any of those cameras will all use the same mathematics and will all have basically the same numbers. Lower end cameras may not have as many increments, so you might not see just as many numbers, but they still will correspond to what's on this camera and what's on the camera I'm filming on, what's on the camera that your mate's got down the road. So you can pick up any camera and know that, say, a 200 is the same on this Nikon as it is on your mate's Canon. Okay, so why 200? What is 200? What is 250? What is 320? 400? 500? What are all those numbers? What do they mean? It's a bit of a meaningless thing to say I want a shutter speed of 640. What does 640 what? It's all a little bit confusing until you realise that they're actually fractions. So 500 is actually 1/500th of a second, and that's actually really, really fast. To demonstrate just how fast that is, if I just put that down for a second, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to move my arm, and that will go, we're just going to count to 1, and you'll see just how far my arm can move in 1 second. Okay, so 1. That's all of that way. So imagine if, can you think that 1 second is quite a quick amount of time, but your arm can actually move, and everything can move quite a lot in that 1 second. That's why cameras like this use super fast moments in time to capture an image, and the faster or the bigger the number, the smaller the fraction, so the small amount of time that the actual shutter is open. So if I set this on 500, that's 1/500th of a second, and I can't move my hand quick enough to actually make that a blur when it's being recorded. If you set a really fast shutter speed, everything that's moving will also be captured pin sharp. So if you're doing sports photography, or you want to record waves splashing against the beach and you want all those droplets of water all frozen in time, what you need to do is set the fastest shutter speed that you can. Now this camera, being quite a high-end camera, can actually go up to 1/8000th of a second, which is super fast. You can't even click your fingers that quick. But what happens when we go the other way? So we can scroll down through the numbers here, and we go past 400, 320, 250, 200, and we keep going, and we get down and we get to 25, 20, 15, and these are all fractions, remember, 10, 8. So 4 is 1/4 of a second, 2 is half a second, and then we get to 1. Now when you get to 1 second, you'll see these two little bars by the 1, as you can see there. Now those two little bars just denote that you're over 1 second. So if you start at 1, you go from 1 to 1.3 to 1.6 to 2, then you go to 2.5, then 3, and then it starts to really jump up in the seconds. You get to 10, 15, 20, 25, and then you get to 30. Now on most cameras, the vast majority of cameras, 30 seconds is the longest amount of time you can set the camera to hold the shutter open. Now if you've seen any of those pictures where the water is all glassy flat and the sky is just all sort of zooming across and you can make out no detail in any of the movement, well, that's because people have used shutter speeds longer than 30 seconds, and everything that's moving around is recorded as a blur, and everything that's stationary, like rocks and stuff like that, that's all sharp. Now they do that by setting the next mode down, which is bulb mode. Why do they call it bulb? Well, that's where this little fella comes in. Again, not going to touch any of the controls, but what they used to do, if you can see there, there's a little, that's where the shutter is there, and they would screw something into there and then in there, and they would have a rubber bulb filled with air that they could seal off, and when they depressed that, that would trip the shutter. They'd seal it off so the shutter would stay depressed, so the shutter remains open, and then when they came to release it again after the amount of time, they just release the bulb, open the shutter, and your exposure's done. So on modern digital cameras, they just kept the same terminology, so that's why it's called bulb mode. There's no rubber bulbs anymore. You can get electronic shutter releases which will screw into somewhere on your camera. Most of the time it's somewhere like that on the front, or it could be on the top, and basically what happens is when you depress the shutter button, the shutter opens, and it will stay open as long as you've got your finger on that button. So when you release, the shutter then closes again. When it comes to opening the shutter for that length of time, you're really wise to get one of those shutter releases just so you can hold the shutter button down without actually touching the camera. Because you imagine if you wanted to record something like a rock in pin sharp, any amount of movement when the shutter's open for that amount of time means that you'll end up with blurry rock. So everything's got to be rock steady just to make sure stationary objects are recorded really, really sharp. So that was just a basic look at shutter speed, where to find it on your camera, and what the numbers mean. If you like this video, please click like. If you wanted to ask a question or leave a comment, there's that box down below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.